Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma. I'm Nick, and today we have a very special guest, Marc Cordon, and we're going to talk about Beyond Resilient.
Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Illumination Podcast. We are super excited to have a fantastic guest on today, Marc Cordon, and I know that we're going to have an amazing conversation. However, I want to give you a heads up. Kisma's away, everybody. So it's kind of a guys' conversation here, just the guys hanging out, and we're going to talk about positive psychology. We're going to talk about Beyond Resilient and whatever else comes up in this amazing conversation, because Marc is a really incredible human being. And I can't wait for you to get to meet him. Kisma is going to be checking in from India, so you can definitely look forward for some episodes from her, solo episodes, and whatever else she comes up with along the way. We all know how she rolls in her magical and whimsical life. So I'm really excited for that. But most importantly, I'm really excited to bring on Marc Cordon. He is a positive psychology coach and author of the book Beyond Resilient, which is a coach's guide to ecstatic growth. He's received coaching accolades from the Institute of Professional and Excellence in Coaching, including an Energy Leadership Index, Master Practitioner, Certified Professional Coach, and Specialties in Transitions, Leadership, Performance, and Wellbeing. Dang, that is a mouthful of very cool things. And one of the things that I'm super excited to talk about with is his joy revolution and some of the things that have led to this creation. He's been in this industry for over 2 decades and worked with just countless people in self-development through speaking and retreats and mini courses, and one-on-one advising and mentoring and so much more. And he's got a special gift for you as well. So I really can't wait to get this going. So Marc, I'm so happy you're here, and I can't wait to see what happens.
Nick, I can't wait to see what happens too. It is men's night on the Illumination Podcast. I'm loving this, bro. I'm loving this.
I'm with you. It's a rare occurrence, man. I'm really excited. The first thing that caught my eye here is you use a word that I find very interesting, resilient.
Yeah.
It's something I talk about a ton through my work with Energy Mastery. Like, I believe that energetic resilience is just incredibly important for all sorts of reasons. But I'm wondering what that word means to you and why you chose it.
Yeah, well, simply put, the word just means being able to bounce back from any kind of organizational, environmental press that you might feel and getting back to your original status quo. The way that I think about it, Nick, is do you remember when we grew up, those like clowns that we'd fill them up with air, and then when we'd punch them, they just bounce back? And the harder you punch them, the harder they bounce back.
I totally remember those.
Yeah, that's what I think about when I think about resilience. Resilience is just that idea that when you get knocked over by some sort of environmental punch, your ability to just rock back up and get back to where it is that you want to get back to. Now, the thing about why I called the book Beyond Resilience is this idea that if we truly want to grow in an environment that's constantly changing, we have to change and adapt with the environment, which means that we have to have a certain amount of ecstatic growth, joyful growth, not just these moments where we're just bouncing back to a status quo. Because if we bounce back to a status quo and the environment is changing, we are kind of falling behind in the times. Does that make sense, Nick?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So basically what you're saying is it's like, okay, that's cool to bounce back. Like, it is very cool to bounce back because a lot of people get taken down for the count, man.
Yes.
Bouncing back is one thing, and that's amazing in and of itself. But really what's beyond that is like not just bouncing back to your status quo, but really and truly taking that to a new level. I think about that as kind of like, I don't know, it's like a jujitsu kind of where something comes your way, but it's not just about defending against it. It's really about taking that thing and using it to your advantage.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to talk about what positive psychology means in a second, but in the realm of positive psychology, this is a term that's been coined as post-traumatic growth. It's in opposition to post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's the idea that when a trauma, like when the punch comes, we're able to bounce back from the trauma, and then we find ways to grow as a result of that trauma. We're even better as a result of that trauma. And that's one thing that I love looking at is how is it that we can actually take that adversity and use it to our advantage? And then the next thing that I wanted to think about is an idea of post-ecstatic growth. And that is, can we actually take away the trauma from our lives and actually just grow without the trauma? Why do we always need a negative setback to continue to grow in our lives? That notion that no pain, no gain, it's one way to think about your life. But what about the idea of gain if we're obviously just adding value and mindfulness on a regular basis to our life? Can we have the gains without the pains? I don't necessarily think that it's you can live a life of just pure privilege without pain. I mean, everyone's going to go through that point where you're going to have to be resilient because the environment changes so much. But can we step forward and say, you know what, today is not the worst day of my life. There's no trauma that's being introduced today. But how can I continue to grow, Nick?
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. In my life, like I had a realization when I was in India, actually doing this wild kind of breathing process, rebirthing process. And my big takeaway from the whole thing, which I feel like maybe I could have gotten some other ways, but whatever, I got it there. But my big takeaway from the whole thing was that I had been fighting a battle. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, who am I even fighting anymore? Mm-hmm. And it's like, it said like that no pain, no gain kind of attitude of like, if I'm not having to fight and kick and scratch for it, then it's like, it's not worth it. Or it's not like I shouldn't, it's not like a worthy cause or something like that. And I don't know, man, it just set up or like I had seen in my whole life how that had set up just a really negative pattern. And moving beyond that was probably one of the best things I ever did for myself to just basically, which was essentially a decision to be like, yeah, I'm not fighting the battle anymore. It doesn't mean I'm going to back down, but it also means that I'm not just going to like constantly have to feel like I have to fight and defend,
Nick, I absolutely love that example. Because you're activating me to think about my own value systems that have either been imposed on me or that I adopted, in which at an early age, I needed to think about this idea that having parents as immigrants to the United States, that if I wanted to be successful, I needed to do something that, had the pain of immigration, leaving my family, uprooting myself. I needed to go through that. I'm thinking about messages that I picked up. I'm not saying that this is the message of Christianity, but as someone who was raised as a Christian, when I first was introduced to it, I thought I needed to bear a cross and walk my life with a cross in order to feel success in the future, feel happiness in the future.
Yep.
And one of the things was it was always like a me versus the environment, me versus them type of mentality, like you were talking about. And very similar to you, I was like, who am I against? It came to the point in grad school where I thought that the teachers were trying to fail me on purpose. I actually sat down with them and had a cup of coffee, and they're like, dude, we want you to pass. We want you to represent us. Like, you're a smart guy. Like, we're not trying to hold you back, bro. But like, you got to do your work. You can't write about World of Warcraft all the time in our program. You have to show us that you understand these theories. And I'm grateful that they did. And I'm also grateful that I can still write about World of Warcraft if I want to. But the thing is that it's this idea that the only way that we can progress is if we introduce pain in our life, or if we have to, the us versus them mentality. You have to be it very subtly says I have to take power away from somebody else or defeat them in order for myself to grow. There is no abundance mentality in that. That's very political in nature. Yeah. That's very agenda driven. Sometimes there are very limited resources, but we can still find ways to work together and grow from that. And so that's what I really love about that concept of post-traumatic growth moving to post-ecstatic growth. And it's completely changed the way that I live my life and want to solve problems. And that's why I'm happy to share it with people.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a game changer. It's just a radical shift in perspective. Where did you grow up, by the way?
I grew up in Florida, of all places. I grew up in Florida. My parents came from the Philippines. The great thing was that ostensibly, like, I grew up like all American. I had Pizza Hut, Swatch watches, all the luxuries that in all of
watches,
Nintendo Entertainment System, all the stuff that, all the stuff that upper class kids would want, and that was an attribution to, again, here I go, the sacrifices that my parents made. That was an idea that was in my mind. If I want my kids to move forward, if I want the people around me to move forward, I need to sacrifice myself. I need to sacrifice my happiness. And so even those messages that I was getting early on, Nick, was very much a story of sacrifice, a story of I wouldn't call it suppression of my greatest self, but that's what I thought it needed to be. Because, when I was a kid, I also thought that I wanted to be a superhero and a rock star. And then I thought, if I really want to be successful in this world, I need to suppress that. And I need to just kind of go with the status quo. Asian Americans are good at math. They're good at science. Maybe I should just go into science.
And you definitely don't stand out.
No,
that is not okay.
No, exactly. And so those were some of the messages that I grew up with. And going into college, I could definitely feel this internal versus external pull. Should I go into neuroscience, and should I go into the science field, follow my parents' footsteps in the medical field? At the time, I felt called. I still feel called to do it. But at the time, I thought it was almost juvenile to want to do Asian American work, to want to look at philosophy, to want to, I thought it was almost, self-serving on my part. What I realized was that there's ways that you can serve both the self and the community. And when you're operating in your highest good, you don't make a distinction between the two. You're playing. You're having fun. You're joking around. You're jumping on podcasts with people. You're talking about microphones before we go live, right? And I'm loving everything about the conversation. And then also at the same time, I'm hoping that, at the tail end of this, someone's listening to something that we're talking about and getting benefit from it. That's the amazing part of life, is that we don't have to suffer every single moment of it. We don't have to sacrifice every single moment, and we can contribute to the greater good at the same time. And it took a while. I mean, this is all fast forwarding through things and jumping to other episodes, but also at the same time, that's sort of the contrast of where I was in college and where it is that I am now. But also at the same time, when you ask me a question, that's where did I come from? Where did I grow up? I can still think, wow, I still think about the sacrifices my parents made. So it's very hard to break a lot of mentalities. Even when I'm writing about it.
Yeah. I mean, those things are so deeply ingrained.
Absolutely.
It just becomes, such a fabric of the way that we think and be in so many different ways. But it doesn't mean, like you said, though, that you can't live beyond it. It's not necessarily, I think this is a misunderstanding in the personal growth realm is like, you have to just get rid of all that stuff. Like, it has to be gone for good. And I really just see that as a process of solving a layer, taking a step, and solving a layer and taking a step. Because if you're waiting for that magical moment when you have the epiphany, it's like you could just be sitting there forever. It happens through action. It happens through interacting with people. It happens through being out in the world. And it lets you, for me personally anyway, I can only speak for myself, is just really own the things that I do carry with me to this day that are in their own process of resolving. And at the same time, look back and be like, this has been a wild journey. And I'm really happy to have made it as far as I have, as humble as that may be. Did you ever have a conversation with your parents about this as you started to kind of break that mold? How did they take it?
I absolutely had conversations about it. I think as someone who grew up as a very non-confrontational, I had no idea how to broach the subject with them. And at first, you know what? That nervousness was pounced on by them. I remember having those initial conversations with them. I remember them saying, well, what are you going to do with a philosophy degree? What are you going to do? We came to the United States, we did all these things. It was the immigration story, right? Mm-hmm. They reinforced it. We came to the United States to do this. We came to the United States to do that. And you want to not have those luxuries for your own children? For our grandchildren? I remember saying, well, I can't really answer that. I don't know what to do with a philosophy degree at that point. I don't know what to do with a psychology degree, but I just know that that's what is fascinating to me. One of the things that I was misinterpreting was this idea that they wanted me to live a rigid life and go into only medicine. I think the messages that they were trying to send me that I wasn't interpreting was, we just want you to live without the feeling of struggle that we had. Yeah. Now, one of the things that was awesome about philosophy was the idea that struggle and pain were the same thing growing up to me. When you separate some of those things, and this goes into Eastern philosophy, it goes into some thinking patterns and stuff, mindset work. When you understand that you can be going through pain, but it's not suffering. You choose not to suffer. You understand that pain is just a part of what you said, Nick, the process of things. Then you understand that it's a process of continual growth. Pain will sometimes be a part of it. Feeling disillusioned will sometimes be a part of it. But it's not shits and giggles 24/7 happiness that you need to feel. And so that's also the other side of post-ecstatic growth, is this idea that, like, it's not about the shits and giggles 24/7. It is about understanding the process. When we start growing, we'll always feel a certain amount of dissonance to grow from our former selves. And we'll always feel a certain amount of, you know what, I can't sit in the status quo anymore. I'm not quite sure what this will look like, but I have to take a leap of faith, which goes beyond even positive psychology. We're looking at things like spirituality there, Yeah. And that's what I love about this whole process, is now I get to reflect on it and say, you know what? That was a moment in which I thought I understood what the little truth was. But now that I even go and replay that scene back, that scene looks very different. And the way that I interpret it is very different. And the information that they were trying to send to me was very different. And I'm so happy that at the time I interpreted that way, and I interpreted a different way now. And they were giving me some amazing messages growing up. And so I don't have to be this angry Asian kid at my parents or angry Asian kid at society 24/7 either.
Yeah.
And you know what? I also love the idea that you brought up pain as a part of the process, because a lot of people think that positive psychology is only about positivity. It's only about levity. It ends in the word psychology, which means that it does have this idea of how the individual is making sense of the world around them inside of themselves, which means that pure psychology and experiential learning from the world means that you are going to be in dissonance with the world. It means that you are going to be in synchrony with the universe. Dare I say, spiritual things are happening in psychology even, and so you're going to be in and out of things, days change. I've had an amazing week, but we know on Monday when I missed the podcast, I felt terrible. It was not a happy day for me. Things change day to day, and that's just a part of the life that we live.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to remember. And I'd love to share, like, really honestly, like, that's a misunderstanding that I had about positive psychology. So yeah, I'm wondering if you can just maybe unpack that a little bit, so it puts the whole positive psychology conversation just in the proper context to understand what it is, why it was, kind of why it was developed, and how you came into it.
Historically, it's not as new as a lot of people think that it is. It was actually based on just original psychology. Psychology used to look at what happens to us when we fall into a negative space. We fall into -1. We're not functioning well in the world, and how to bring us back to status quo. And then we would then look at, once we're back at status quo, or if we feel like we're living at status quo, we've gone from -1 to 0. How can we go to living our life from 0 to infinity? Not +1, 0 to infinity. What does the optimized life look like? And what happened was that folks like Maslow started throwing these cool ideas out. What does it mean to completely self-actualize and then go into self-transcendence? Maslow wrote another chapter saying we're going to go into this mode of positive psychology, and then major wars broke out in the world. And what happened was when those major wars broke out in the world, people put all hands on deck to treat the post-traumatic stress disorder that people were feeling coming back from the war. So suddenly, positive psychology went to a place where you were treating a psychopathy of something. Someone was coming back from the war. They were experiencing shell shock. We, as therapists, counselors, psychologists, need to be on the same page to get everyone back to zero. Now, the thing is that negative space to zero has stuck for many, many years. And so it was about almost 20 years ago that the president of the Psychological Association in the United States gave a speech and said, it's time for us to go and fill the rest of the void. Right now, we've got articles out it was something like for every 12 to 15 articles that you see on sadness, you'll see one article on happiness. And if you think about the way that our reality is constructed, if the majority of time we're only focused on getting from -1 to 0, we'll think that the reality of our life is that we have to constantly struggle to get back to status quo. And so what he was arguing was that if we don't do due diligence to find how to live at infinity, if we're not looking at what's going right in the world, then we're missing a whole part of our life. We're going to only be chasing getting to 0 and staying at 0. And we'll think that living at an infinity stage, living optimized, is a pipe dream or it's a privilege. And that's what I thought that happiness and joy used to be, was a privilege. I could only think about happiness until I got myself out of a negative state. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is that that's not necessarily true. And, Nick, at the time that I had first heard about positive psychology, I was one pissed off Asian dude. I thought that the way to have revolution, I thought that the way to have social change in the world was that I needed to pit myself against another human being and defeat their way of thinking. I needed to show people that I was more right than them. And that was coming from a place of pure anger and staying at a place of pure anger. It's okay. But what I learned with positive psychology is that it's okay to be outraged, but to stay in a place of outrage is not what we're trying to get at. Yeah. We're trying to get at a place of progress. We're trying to get at a place of saying, you know what? I can be in joy and I can also be outraged to want change right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things I want to circle back to, at least a few. I mean, first and foremost is anger.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's a very energizing emotion.
Absolutely.
In the moment. And it also breaks a lot of things. So I don't know, to me anyway, and that's what I've seen is like people, they just don't really understand what that really is and why they're needing to access that. But ultimately it really is just a way to get things done and a way to get people to listen.
Absolutely. And especially if someone has felt like they were a victim their whole life, or they don't have a certain amount of agency in the world. The idea of being activated through anger is almost like a next level energy, right? Where you're saying, you know what? I have no agency in the world. I have no locus of control. The next step is saying, you know what? I have a locus of control and I have to defeat somebody in order to do that.
Right.
It's almost the anger stage. The higher levels above that is almost like shifting gears, right? You go and say, okay, I don't have to defeat someone. I can work with them on a win-win situation. Higher than that is I can live in joy and continue to want to have change in the world. I'm not saying that that's easy, but also at the same time, it's been really cool to go through coaching certification programs, energy leadership, and look back at the original things that they were working on when positive psychology dropped off and say that has complete and utter it completely parallels stuff that people write off as magical thinking and woo.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny. It's like a lack of belief. Like one of the things, that I do with some of the healing work. I mean, it's miracle kind of stuff, but people have a misunderstanding that a miracle is just like, that it's just like some magical thing that just sort of happens. It's like there are laws of nature that govern miracles.
Exactly. And that to me is what opened the door to, I was I've been a numbers guy the majority of my life, Nick, but that to me was the point in which I looked at positive psychology. I was looking at the numbers. I was saying, at that point, I was saying, you have to prove things to me with empirical data. And it was still left wanting. The research was still left wanting. And if we really want to be able to live the fullest life, we have to make those jumps and say, you know what? It's not all in the books. There's certain things that people have been writing about from the beginning of time that if we just look at things, it has all intersected with the message people have been trying to tell us, and we encode it and we overthink it. We turn them into rigid dogma. We fight each other. We go into the us versus them mentality to see who's more right, when in reality, it's just a different perception of looking at the same stuff.
Yeah. It's to me, it's like a search for that infallible formula, which at a certain level, I actually really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's just not incredibly practical for living your life, doing cool things in the world and helping people.
Exactly. That's exactly why my partner and I started the Joy Revolution. Was very similar to that. Is there is this sort of searching that happens, but the cool thing about the searching process is that it turns into curiosity, and curiosity turns into, well, I want to know more about what Nick is talking about. I want to know more about the opposite of Nick would say. Yeah. I want to know more about what positive psychology would say. I want to know more about what spirituality would say about this. And the more you listen to the different angles, the more that you can find a lot of congruency and similarity to what it is that seemingly opposite things would say. And that's the amazingness of it. But then also at the same time, if you get stuck in the esoteric, how can you actually go and make progress in the world? How can you go and make progress with yourself? And a lot of people talk about the disavowalment of the ego. I have to get rid of my ego. But I also think that's why the ego is a good thing, because without the ego, we'd just be in esoteric mode the whole time.
Right.
The ego is a great thing to help us get shit done.
Yeah, use it. Don't let it use you.
I love it. There you go.
It's it. It's a tool,
I'm stealing that, Nick.
It's all yours. Now, turning into, like you mentioned a couple times, in like the concept of infinity and expanding into affinity. Like I can't think of anything more spiritual than that. Because at the end of the day, it is kind of a total abandonment of all those things. But if that's really where this is leading, it's, to me, what that makes me think of is like, okay, well, what are the psychological constructs that support you being able to expand into that? Because you don't just pop into it necessarily. I mean, in a certain way you do, but at the end of the day, it's like, because infinity is not like a really big number. It's something that's beyond numbers. So there is that quantum leap at a certain point, but to get to that, it's like there has to be built up. Well, I think, like you said, like a true sense of resilience for one, but then also a whole structure that supports that to be able to even entertain those things in a meaningful way and bring them into your life. Does that make sense? And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
It makes absolute sense. I think the idea of infinity is just this idea that you are constantly growing and expanding. You're constantly growing and expanding. And the second that you let go of that is the second you begin to die.
Yep.
You can see it in the philosophies of Bruce Lee to things that go all the way back to Aristotle to before that. And I actually found a great concept that was outside of psychology. It was actually in ecology that I found the concept. And I actually use it a lot in my coaching. And this is the idea of panarchy. Anarchy with a P in front of it. And basically what they found in ecology is that every system, from the universal system to even out here in California to the way that the trees have burned down and the way that we can expect growth, ecstatic growth over that burnt down, the burn areas. in the next couple of years is this idea of panarchy. And that's everything has a cycle of life and death, growth and decay, rebellion, even revolt against itself. And if we think of ourselves as individuals, we do that. We have cycles of growth and decay. You even said it when you were in India, you were having a rebirthing process, right? It was a cycle of decay in order for you to have new growth. We do that as individuals. I was like, we have to constantly grow. I can't find the term in psychology, but then when I looked outside of psychology, that's when it was amazing. It was everywhere. And that idea of panarchy, it's an infinity symbol if you look it up, goes to infinity. The symbol for itself is infinity. And so that's where it made sense that the stuff that Maslow was saying, that you'll get to a certain part where you transcend yourself. It doesn't make sense to exist in yourself anymore. You're going to want to give to the environment. You will be consumed, which is the beginning of decay. It's like it's like when you get consumed with a fire, but then you will rebirth yourself from that. Understand there will always be something that comes from that. And whether that's a spiritual concept or an ecological one or a psychological one, they aren't as dissimilar as people say. We put up so many dang words to separate ourselves. That idea of panarchy is the same idea as infinity in spirituality. And the thing that I think is really funny is that the infinity symbol is used in both, if you just look at it.
Yeah, it's like, well, there's the underlying laws that just govern it all anyway. And it's fascinating that you say that, because philosophically speaking, we die and are reborn every minute of every day, or you can expand that out to, okay, so I die here in my office as I get up and I leave and I go to pour myself a kombucha. And I'm reborn at the kombucha tap, but it's true. And you bring it out. If you really bring that out into your life, it's like, yeah, there's always that constant evolution.
If we think about it, when is it that we stop evolving like that?
I think the answer to that is when you decide to.
Exactly. when you choose to, and even that choice in and of itself is the death and rebirth of something, so like, even when you choose to, it is a death and rebirth. I think there is something that's splendid and amazing. There is something that science can't fully explain. There is something about the human condition that we can all relate to, and it doesn't need language. There is something to the fullness of emotions, not just happiness. There's a fullness to the emotions that we've been given to live a life that is not a unipolar life. It's a multipolar life in which we get to feel all the ups and the downs and the all arounds, to increase our capacity to not only understand the world, but our capacity to change the world as we see it and change the world as other people see it. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're bringing that up, because I'd like to talk for a minute about the Joy Revolution.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
And that idea of social responsibility and what happens there. Like, how was that born? And what is that all about right now?
Yeah, well, it really is the merger of so many fun things that my partner Melanie Klein and I have been doing for so long. One thing that we both found is that in our younger days, we were both really pissed off social justice people that wanted to do a lot of work, but just stay pissed off. It's almost like the pissed offness was a fuel and a validation tool to show everybody that we were activists. If you weren't angry, then you really weren't in the struggle. You weren't
You're not
really
taking it seriously.
Yeah, exactly. You weren't in the fight. You couldn't joke about this stuff because this was some serious crap. And it led both of us to burnout. That's what happened. We were completely consumed by movement work at one point. We stepped away from it, and in our own ways, we found ways to try to make sense of the world around us, to say that there's something more to the world than just being pissed off until the day that you die. And she went on a route that I would encourage people to listen to. My route was one in which I continued to use numbers through positive psychology to figure out other angles of living life. But what I had also found was that once I started reading about happiness and all that kind of other work, I stopped doing social justice work. I thought it was important, but I just stopped doing it. And one of the things that I found, Nick, is that as I'm going into this next chapter of my life, and many people are going into this next chapter of their life, they're asking themselves, can I do the work and the change work that I want to do? Aristotle called this the notion of living a good life, living in eudaimonia, listening to the good demon, eudaimon, listening to the good demon of my life and wanting to help others. The way, thinking about helping others is a way to not to think about my own happiness. And that's the way to become happy. And so to me, social justice work is a way to not think about my own happiness and be happy. But can I do that work without being angry? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes, well, you can't share something in the world that you don't have. And if you're living an angry life, all you're doing at the end of the day is making more anger in the world.
Exactly. I'm so happy that you say that, because there's so many amazing movements that are going on right now. So many folks are activated by so many things that have been either invisible or untalked about, the lives that matter, the Me Too movements. All of that stuff has justification for people to be upset. But if we stay upset and we create change, and the change results in a new status quo, but the status quo remains in an angry state, then we're just going to create more angry people. Mm-hmm. We're going to indoctrinate people to be angry, when in many ways there's an illusion of us versus them. There's a way that we can sit down and we can have controversy with civility. And those are things that we've all learned in kindergarten, but it's almost like we've abandoned them. And, I've felt this at times myself. Hey, look, if you don't like the way that I think, everybody out there in social media land, then you can unfriend me without me actually having a curious conversation about why someone would have a belief system that they have. It's just that my belief system is better, and if you don't believe it, unfriend me.
Right. And I see that. Like, I've seen more of that. I've been on an unfollow frenzy recently, and I'm really enjoying the platform again. But I've seen that several times where it's like, okay, well, here's what I have to say about it, and I don't want to have a debate about it. And it's like, okay, I guess it's your wall. Like, that's certainly your prerogative, and okay, go you. But like, what are you really accomplishing? I don't understand. I mean, I'm genuinely confused. It's like, well, what are you trying to accomplish then?
Absolutely. And everybody, it's exactly true, Nick. Everyone's got their wall. You can do whatever you want with your life. What I'm thinking about is, how many people in my life have I discarded in my 42 years of existence on this world, in the meat suit that I live in currently? Like, how many people have I discarded because I thought that there was nothing that I could learn from them? I remember when I was working in higher education, the person that snapped me out of it when I was a snobby ass administrator who knew all the answers and I was in all these big meetings, was a new student at the university who came in and said, Mark, I think I have a solution to this social justice issue. And he dropped his class on happiness on my desk. And I told him to get the frick out of my office, because we are fighting a war here.
We're fighting a war, man.
Yeah. It was everything. It was everything in my, I think it was like 30 something years of living life. It was everything that I had indoctrinated myself to think. Happiness is a privilege, student. You don't get it. You cannot take this class until you understand where I'm coming from. You need to be more pissed off. And you know what? I'm going to take this syllabus from you and get out of my office, because you don't quite get the social justice movement. Now go and find a social justice class instead of a happiness course.
Wow.
I then looked at what it was that he was trying to say, and it blew my mind. And if I was stuck in a rigid structure, which I was, but if I stayed stuck in that rigid structure, I wouldn't have listened to a perfect teacher who came at the perfect time in my life to completely disrupt my way of thinking. And isn't that what we want from people that we hold high on pedestals? We want them to disrupt us. We give them the respect to disrupt us. But yet we only give it to a few people, and we disrespect everybody else with an opinion. There's more than just positive psychology and spirituality work in which we're only doing the work by going into caves in the top of mountains. Our teachers are everywhere. They're everywhere. And the Joy Revolution is about how we become teachers and students, how we can be both joyful and upset. And these things that are seemingly paradoxical relationships actually become perfect relationships, and ways that we can think about navigating the world, becoming true leaders. And we need movement work. We constantly need movement work. But we need to also be thinking about the idea that happiness is one that is up there in the future, that is a result of acquisition. That's where the dopamine rushes come from. But joy is also something that we need to think about being very cool with our inner selves and understanding that where we are today is absolutely perfect. I was absolutely perfect in my ignorance when a student came in and I had an adverse reaction to them, and he was the perfect person to unlock me and get me to the next stage. There's major things that you're teaching me, and there's major things that there's major things that I can't wait to get out of my own ignorance about. I just need to pay attention to who it is that's telling it, or the people that are telling it to me. They're probably screaming at me. I'm not listening.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things ever. But what I think is super cool about this, and what I really want to highlight, is that you're actually, it seems revolutionary, but you're actually setting everything right side up. There's a misunderstanding, I believe there's a misunderstanding that you can't accomplish things with happiness and joy, that it won't be as meaningful or as useful or as powerful. But the truth of the matter is that you can only accomplish truly meaningful and long-lasting things with happiness and joy.
I absolutely agree with that. If we're thinking about happiness as an acquisition, then you can be as a future acquisition. Then you can be as pissed off as you want. Understand that you will never get that future acquisition, because happiness will always exist in the future. They call this the hedonic treadmill, because for anyone who's ever felt like, oh, if I get this one award, if I get this one degree, if I get this one thing, then I'm going to be happy. And then the next thing we know is that a year later we're unhappy and we want double it. I want the next award. I want the next degree. I want the next accolade in order to make me happy. That's what movement work will look like and feel like to you. That's what change work will feel like. You will never feel the joy of just being in the now and understanding that it's perfect where it is. Someone once described it to me this way. If you think of a rose, you know exactly what the rose is going to look like. And if it looks like a bud today, you can look at it and say, well, I'm not going to acknowledge that bud until it becomes the rose. But if you look at the bud and say the bud is perfect where it is today, and tomorrow it's going to be perfect and more perfect and perfect and perfect. Now we know where it's going to be in an ideal state. That's the idea of it becoming the rose. But the juxtaposition of joy and happiness is one in which we can say it's perfect today and it's going to be perfect tomorrow. And then putting in the idea, let's put it all together. Why not? The idea of panarchy and saying when the rose blooms, we know that it will decay again, and that will help more roses bloom in the future. So it's an amazing system that's out there. And if we only look at one thing like happiness, then we're going to engage in the pursuit of something. If we only engage in joy, then we're not going to really think about why we need to change things for the better. And it really is the juxtaposition. So one thing is not enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Right on.
It's all those different places of yourself. Yeah, men's night is right.
Men's night.
Yeah. Kisma will be so proud. I think about that's my effort in how I see other people. If I live in their potential, well, that's a lovely thing and that's really nice, but it totally bypasses what they're going through right now.
Yep.
And it doesn't give them the opportunity or the bridge to get from one place to another. And certainly that's something I bring into my coaching and healing work with people, but just in a very human way, that's something I try to bring to everybody. to really see that wholeness about them, not just the potential, not just maybe the rough state that they're in at the moment, but all of it together and the possibility that lives within that.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's amazing is that we as humans have the ability to see the blind spots that are not, that other people can't see. Right. And it's these blind spots that keep us from getting to those next levels, right? Those blind spots where we're saying to ourselves, you know what? Like, I know that I have to kill this part of myself off in order to grow. I just don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in working with folks, sometimes all you need to do is sit with them in the space so that they have the time to process that. Sometimes it's an activating question where you just say, what is the truth of what you're going through right now? And you're allowing them to feel the feels in which they're feeling the shame of being angry or jealous or envious of the things that they don't have. And you're saying, well, what is the truth of that? Well, I know that I'm ready to grow now. Well, what do we need to do? Well, I think that the first step looks like X. And that's what I love about coaching is that coaching is this great thing where you get to sit with someone and see their infinite potential, but also see how perfect they are today. And you get to just sit with them as they continue to go on that journey where it feels off and then it feels right and then feels off and then feels right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that in and of itself changes the way that I navigate through the world. So they are my teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And one of my favorite moments with clients is is that they've got something like that's really, I could tell it's like really weighing on them and they're just like, they're afraid to say it. They're like, it's going to sound weird. It's going to sound this. And they come out with it. I'm just like, that is just so not
right.
Like there's nothing that you could tell me that would really shock me at this point, and I'm like, oh, that's so cute. And all right. And I really honor that for you. And that's awesome. And let's talk about, how we solve that.
Well, and isn't that funny, Nick? Because it could be one of the biggest things that cause fear in us is that we might become ostracized, that we're completely different from the human tribe. And in many ways, we're all kind of thinking very similar things. And then when we kind of put it out there and someone's like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
It makes us very human again.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Very awesome.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful thing. It's like such a huge let go. And I always have a little, I don't laugh at their face, obviously, but sometimes I do, if we have a good joke about it. But mostly it's an inward smile. That's just like, I couldn't be more there with you. I totally understand that.
It's very cool. And I think one of the things that is a great, it's just really cool to see what's going on in society right now. A lot of what's going on in the media reflects the way that we as citizens who consume the media will want to consume it. Right. And so there's these shows now. There's one particular show I'm thinking about that everyone is raving about. That's about like tidying up your house.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So you the way that you tidy up your house, you have to face the mess. And then after you face the mess, then you clean out space for more things to grow. And I'm like, oh, how funny is that we go and use that or so many people are attaching themselves to that when in many ways, that's what so many philosophers to coaches have been saying this whole time. Face your mess through positive psychology, spirituality, a coach. Face your mess, tidy it up, and then you'll have the space to grow in that. But as long as it's feeling cluttered, it's going to be hard to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just like in a garden, she lost me a little bit when it was like, you can only keep 30 books. That made me really nervous. I was like, we're drawing the line there, but I really appreciate the concept and I can apply it in other areas. So thank you.
The concepts make a lot of sense.
I'd like to close out and just talk about your book really briefly, Beyond Resilient, The Coach's Guide to Ecstatic Growth. Like, who is this for? On paper, it's a really great read for coaches who want to set up their business. But what I wanted to write was this sort of universal story of someone who struggled with getting to this point of, well, I have everything that I've wanted when it comes to growing up as an American and having the 2.5 kids and having the
2 cars in a garage and having the ostensibly cool job, and getting to this point where family were happy with me. But internally, I was grappling with the fact that I still wanted to be the Batman and the Michael Jackson, the rock stars that I grew up watching. And so in many ways, the book was about how do I come to a point where I am going to actually have difficult conversations with family and friends saying, look, on paper I'm successful, but I will go to my deathbed with regrets if I don't go after things that I feel might be crazy to you guys. And I understand that this might cause some isolation on my part, but the journey is mine to take in the same way that my parents wanted to get up and go to the Americas. They wanted to go on their own journey. And so this was the psychological journey of me understanding my parents, me understanding myself. And so if anyone has been in dissonance, I start the book out with what Maslow said, the father of positive psychology. What one thinks that they can be, they must be. And at that point, that is a spiritual journey. Maslow's talking about spirituality. And so the book just goes in different places. I use pop culture references, pro wrestling references, in order to understand what it was that I was going through, in the same way that we just used a Marie Kondo reference. And I would love anyone, if anyone is who is listening, I would love to be able to gift that book to them, if it's cool.
Yeah, I'd love that. I can't wait to grab a copy myself. So for all the listeners, where you go is marccordon.com/Illumination Podcast. So that's MarcCordon.com/Illumination Podcast, not spelling out that whole thing, one word. MarcCordon.com/Illumination Podcast. I can't wait to grab a copy myself and really check it out. It's been really a joy to have you on. No, I mean, that's true. So sincerely, it's like, it's really been a joy to have, like, what a great conversation, man. I'm so enjoyed having you on. So thank you so much for making the time for us and for all of our listeners.
Likewise, Nick, this has been an absolute joy on my end as well.
Yeah. Have an amazing day. And we'll look forward to everybody grabbing their copy of Beyond Resilience at marccordon.com/Illumination Podcast. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, brother.
Peace.
Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.